They told the police that I was no longer thinking clearly. That age had finally dulled my judgment. That I was forgetting things that mattered: bills, safety, reality itself. They used careful words, the kind that sound harmless until you realize what they're designed to do. But when the officer arrived at my door that morning, his concern didn't linger on my memory or my age the way they had hoped. Instead, he asked a question that exposed everything they were trying to hide. He asked who had been paying the property taxes on this house since the early 1980s. That question didn't just shift the conversation, it shifted my understanding of what was happening to me. I wasn't being checked on. I was being tested, measured, positioned out of my own life. I stood barefoot in the doorway of the home I had lived in for decades, the cool floor pressing up through my feet. In my hand was a half-peeled apple, the knife resting lightly against the skin, frozen mid-motion. I remember thinking how ordinary the moment had been just seconds earlier. Tea warming on the stove. Morning light coming through the curtains. Nothing about the day had suggested that strangers would soon be questioning whether I belonged inside my own walls. The officer was young, polite, careful with his posture. He introduced himself and asked if I recognized my own name, my address, the date. His voice was neutral, but his eyes were alert, watching for hesitation, for confusion, for anything he could write down later. Behind him, my daughter and her husband stood close together, their faces arranged into expressions of concern that felt practiced rather than natural. They nodded gently as he spoke, as though silently encouraging him to continue. For a brief moment, the whole scene felt detached from reality, like I was watching it happen to someone else. But years teach you how to stay still when others expect you to unravel. I answered calmly, clearly, without defensiveness. The officer explained that a report had been made suggesting I might not be managing my household safely anymore. That they were required to check on me. Required. That word always arrives dressed as procedure, but it usually hides intention. I stepped aside and allowed them in, not because I felt pressured, but because I knew my home would tell a story they couldn't rewrite. The house was warm and quiet. The kettle still held heat. The newspaper lay folded on the table, the crossword half completed. Shoes sat neatly by the door. Nothing chaotic. Nothing neglected. Still, my daughter released a slow sigh the moment she stepped inside, as though disappointment had already settled in her chest. She glanced around, eyes landing on the wallpaper she'd never liked, the cabinet handle that creaked if you pulled it too hard. Her husband stayed close to the wall, hands in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. The officer watched me instead, studying my movements, my posture, waiting for something to falter. I handed him the apple and asked if he'd like to finish peeling it, just in case he doubted my coordination. The suggestion caught him off guard. He blinked, then smiled, not the polite kind, but a real one that slipped out before he could stop it. My daughter didn't smile at all. She spoke next. Quickly. Listing concerns the way someone recites a checklist. Forgetfulness. Safety. Important documents. She used that soft, careful voice people use when they want to sound reasonable while taking something away. The officer listened without interrupting, then turned back to me and asked if I handled my finances on my own. The question tightened something in my chest, though I kept my expression steady. I've paid every bill myself, I said, including property taxes. Every year. For over 40 years. That was when the room changed. The officer glanced at my daughter. She stiffened. Her husband cleared his throat and muttered something about confusion, about possible misunderstandings. The officer asked to walk through the house. Standard procedure, he said. As we moved from room to room, my daughter pointed out every minor imperfection as though she were narrating decline. I stayed quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. He noticed the things she didn't mention. The labeled pantry shelves. The orderly paperwork stacked by category. The half-done crossword puzzle. Routine has a language of its own, and he understood it. When we returned to the living room, he paused before asking who currently paid my bills. Still me, I said. Every month. Then I added evenly, unless someone has done something behind my back. Silence followed. Heavy and uncomfortable. The officer closed his notebook slowly. That was the moment he stopped seeing me as a subject of concern and started seeing the situation for what it truly was. He asked to speak with me privately. And behind us, the whispers began. The officer's request to speak with me alone was delivered calmly, but it landed heavily in the room. Authority doesn't need to announce itself loudly, it simply shifts the balance. I nodded and gestured toward the kitchen, rising from my chair without hesitation. I made sure my steps were steady, deliberate. I could feel my daughter's eyes on my back, sharp with unease. Behind us, I heard her whisper something urgently to her husband, not concern anymore, but calculation. The kitchen was familiar in a way that steadies the soul. Same table, same chair, same view out the window where the morning light fell just right. I had sat there through decades of ordinary life, bills, birthdays, grief, recovery. The officer took the chair across from me and rested his notebook on the table, though he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing something he couldn't write down. "Mrs." he paused, confirming my name again, "I need to ask you a few questions directly." "Of course," I said. "You should." He asked about falls first. Whether I had tripped recently. Whether I felt dizzy, confused, disoriented. I answered plainly. No, no, no. He asked if anyone assisted me with daily tasks, cooking, cleaning, finances. Again no. He asked whether I drove myself when needed, whether I remembered appointments, whether I took medications correctly. Each question felt less like an evaluation and more like a confirmation. I wasn't proving myself, I was disproving a story. He finally opened the notebook and asked about my finances. Who managed my accounts? Who had access? Whether I had granted anyone power of attorney. That was when something cold settled in my stomach. I haven't given anyone that authority, I said carefully, though it's been suggested to me more than once. His pen paused. Just briefly, but enough. Suggested how? He asked. I leaned back slightly, choosing my words. Disguised as concern. Planning ahead. Making things easier. You know the language. He nodded slowly. He did know. Before he could continue, the kitchen door opened. My daughter stepped in without knocking, her smile strained and too quick to appear. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay, she said lightly. You know how stubborn she can be. The officer turned toward her, his expression neutral but firm. I asked to speak with her privately. Of course, she said, though she didn't leave right away. Her eyes flicked to me. A warning. A reminder. I met her gaze without blinking. She left. The officer waited until the door closed again. Then he asked the question that made my hands go cold. Have you been asked to sign any documents recently? I didn't answer immediately. Silence can be a form of honesty too. When I finally spoke, my voice was even. There was a letter, I said, a few weeks ago, about confirming my competency. His head lifted. From whom? Not from the county, I replied. I checked. That was when his demeanor changed completely. He sat back, no longer casual, no longer observational. This wasn't a welfare check anymore. This was something else. He asked to see the letter. I told him it was in my study. As we stood, I felt the weight of decades pressing behind me, all the moments when I had chosen peace over confrontation, silence over correction. That weight lifted with every step I took toward the hallway. My daughter watched us from the living room. Her face tightened when she realized where we were going. The study smelled faintly of paper and polish. I opened the cabinet and pulled out a thick binder, not just the letter, but records. Years of them. Bank statements. Tax receipts. Insurance documents. Carefully labeled, organized by year. I handed it to him without ceremony. He flipped through the pages slowly. Thoroughly. The sound of paper turning filled the room. My daughter hovered in the doorway now, no longer pretending not to listen. These are very well kept, he said. They're my responsibility, I replied. They always have been. He found the letter. Read it twice. His jaw tightened. This request wasn't filed through the proper channel, he said quietly. And it lists concerns that don't align with what I'm seeing. My daughter stepped forward. We were just trying to help, she said quickly. You know how these things go. We didn't want things to get worse. Worse than what? I asked. She didn't answer. The officer closed the binder and turned to her. His tone remained calm, but the warmth was gone. Filing unsubstantiated claims about a competent adult is a serious matter. Her face flushed. We were scared. Of what? He asked. Again, silence. He made notes now. Clear ones. Not rushed. Not tentative. He explained that his report would reflect what he had observed: my coherence, my independence, the state of the home, and the presence of pressure from family members. Pressure. That word echoed louder than anything else he had said. When he finally stood to leave, the house felt different. Lighter. Exposed. My daughter avoided my eyes as he thanked me for my time. Her husband stared at the floor. At the door, the officer paused and turned back to me. If anyone attempts to pursue this again, he said, I recommend you speak to an attorney immediately. I nodded. I already planned to. After he left, the silence stretched between us like a crack in the foundation. My daughter accused me of humiliating her, of choosing a stranger over family. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said quietly, You didn't come here to protect me. You came to replace me. She left soon after. That night, I slept poorly, not from fear, but from clarity. The kind that rearranges your understanding of the past. In the morning, I made the call. The attorney listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. By the end of the conversation, protections were being put in place. Boundaries reinforced. Doors closed that should never have been tested. Days later, official confirmation arrived. The inquiry had been dismissed. Permanently. And with it, something else settled in. I was no longer confused about where I stood. The days after the officer's visit passed quietly on the surface, but underneath, everything had shifted. The house was the same. The routines were the same. Morning light still reached the kitchen table at the same hour. Yet nothing felt untouched. Once you realize someone has been measuring your life, even silence begins to sound different. My daughter didn't call. Not that evening. Not the next day. At first, I told myself it was embarrassment. Then I understood it was something else entirely. Distance was now strategy. Silence had become a tool. I replayed the last few years in my mind, noticing details I had once brushed aside. The repeated suggestions that I should simplify things. The way conversations always drifted toward the house. The documents she encouraged me to just sign for peace of mind. At the time, I'd believed patience was kindness. Now I saw how easily kindness can be mistaken for surrender. When the attorney called back, his tone was measured but firm. He explained what had already been done, the report filed, the misrepresentation of my condition, the attempt to initiate a competency review without proper cause. He said something then that stayed with me. People don't do this accidentally, he said. They do it when they believe time is on their side. That sentence settled deep. We began building a record, not just documents, but context. Dates. Conversations. Patterns. I provided everything I could remember. The attorney wasn't surprised. He said he had seen this before. Families who confused inheritance with entitlement. Children who mistook proximity for ownership. He advised me to update everything. Will. Medical directives. Financial permissions. Not as punishment, as clarity. Control, once defined, leaves little room for manipulation. That afternoon, I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years. Old photographs slipped out. Letters written in steadier handwriting than my own. Receipts yellowed with age. This house wasn't just property. It was memory. Sacrifice. Decades of decisions made carefully, deliberately. No one had the right to rewrite that. A week later, my daughter finally came by. No warning. No call. She stood on the porch like a visitor instead of a resident. I didn't invite her in right away. She began with apologies, not the kind that acknowledge harm, but the kind that soften blame. She said stress had clouded her judgment, that she'd only wanted to help, that she feared I'd be left alone someday with no plan. I listened quietly. When she finished, I asked one question. Why didn't you talk to me first? She looked away. That answer told me everything. She asked if we could move past this. I told her we could move forward, but not backward. Forward required honesty. And honesty required boundaries she wasn't ready for. Her voice sharpened then. She said I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand how difficult it was for her to worry about me all the time. I reminded her that worry does not grant authority. Love does not erase consent. That was when the truth slipped out. She said the house was too much for someone my age, that selling it would be practical, that she had already spoken to someone about options. I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not sadness, but certainty. I told her the house was not for discussion, that any future decisions would be made by me, documented by my attorney, and shared only when necessary. Her face tightened. She accused me of choosing isolation over family. No, I said. I'm choosing autonomy over fear. She left without another word. That evening, I walked through every room slowly. The living room where birthdays had passed. The hallway where heights were once measured in pencil marks. The study where bills had been paid year after year, quietly, without applause. Each space reminded me that independence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply exists, until someone tries to take it. The official letter arrived a few days later. The inquiry had been closed. Permanently. The language was clinical, unemotional, but the meaning was clear. I had been found competent. Fully. Unequivocally. I placed the letter in the binder and closed it. Weeks passed. My daughter kept her distance. Neighbors waved as usual. Life resumed its rhythm. But I moved through it differently now. More aware. Less forgiving of assumptions. Age may slow the body, but it sharpens the instinct. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, tea cooling beside me, and realized something quietly powerful. I had not won. I had simply refused to disappear. After the letter arrived confirming the inquiry had been closed, I didn't feel relief the way people expect you to. There was no rush of victory, no sense of celebration. What I felt instead was a quiet, steady clarity, the kind that settles in once uncertainty finally leaves. The question of whether I belonged in my own life had been answered. Not emotionally, but officially. Permanently. I placed the letter in the binder with the others and slid it back onto the shelf. Then I sat there for a long time, hands folded, listening to the house breathe. Pipes shifting. Wood creaking. Familiar sounds that reminded me how long I had lived inside these walls without explanation or permission. The attorney called later that week. We went over the final safeguards. Everything was documented now, explicitly. Financial authority restricted. Medical decisions clearly outlined. No room left for interpretation, assumption, or quiet overreach. He explained each step carefully, not because I didn't understand, but because respect sounds like inclusion. You've done the right thing, he said. I thanked him, though I didn't feel brave. I felt necessary. There's a difference. Word traveled slowly through the family. Some relatives reached out, cautiously, as if testing the ground beneath a changed landscape. Others stayed silent. I didn't chase either group. Peace has a way of revealing who valued access more than connection. One afternoon, while sorting through an old drawer, I found a small notebook I'd kept years ago. Inside were reminders written in my own hand, appointments, thoughts, plans for repairs that were long since finished. On the last page, a sentence stood alone. Never confuse quiet with weakness. I don't remember writing it, but I must have known even then. My daughter called weeks later. Her voice was softer now. Tired. She asked how I was doing, carefully avoiding the topics that had once dominated our conversations. I told her the truth, that I was well, that I had structure, that I was managing just fine. She hesitated, then asked if I'd reconsidered selling the house. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. No, I said. And that will never change. She didn't argue this time. Silence lingered between us, not hostile, just honest. When we ended the call, I felt no guilt. Boundaries don't erase love. They reveal its limits. Spring arrived quietly. I opened windows. Let air move through rooms that had held tension for too long. Neighbors stopped by with small talk and familiar smiles. No one treated me like I was fading. They never had. I realized then how invisible competence becomes when people expect decline. How easily independence is overlooked when it doesn't ask to be noticed. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, I thought back to the officer's first question, the one that had cracked everything open. Who had been paying the property taxes all these years? The answer had never changed. I had. Not just the taxes. The upkeep. The responsibility. The weight of decisions made without applause. I had paid for this life with attention, consistency, and care. That kind of ownership doesn't expire with age. I began to write again, not records this time, but reflections. Not for anyone else. For myself. Pages filled slowly. Thoughts sharpened. Memory organized itself the way it always had, patiently, deliberately. In the quiet, something important became clear. They hadn't underestimated my mind. They had underestimated my resolve. And that, more than anything, is what I reclaimed. Time has a way of softening sharp moments, but it also clarifies them. As weeks turned into months, the urgency that once filled my home faded, leaving behind something steadier. Life didn't dramatically improve, nor did it collapse. It simply returned to what it had always been, mine. I settled back into my routines without announcing them to anyone. Mornings began the same way they always had. Tea first. Newspaper second. A quiet pause before the day unfolded. I no longer felt the need to prove my capability through explanation or performance. Independence doesn't require witnesses. Occasionally, I thought about how close I had come to losing more than just a house. If I had hesitated, if I had stayed silent, if I had trusted concern without questioning its source. Those thoughts didn't frighten me, they reminded me why clarity matters. My daughter kept her distance. When we spoke, our conversations were polite, careful, stripped of assumption. There was no dramatic reconciliation.
No final confrontación.
Just an understanding, unspoken but firm, that certain lines could never be crossed again. Love, I learned, can exist without access. One afternoon, I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar surfaces, the banister worn smooth by decades of hands, the door frame where height had once been measured, the study where decisions had quietly shaped an entire life. This place held my history, but it did not define my future. I did. The binder stayed on the shelf, untouched. Not because it wasn't important, but because it no longer needed to be reached for. Protection works best when it becomes invisible. Sometimes neighbors asked how I was doing. I smiled and told them the truth. I'm doing just fine. And I was. I understood now that strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it stands barefoot in a doorway, answering questions calmly while others wait for it to fail. Sometimes it peels an apple slowly, refusing to rush simply because someone else is impatient. The officer never returned. The system moved on. Life continued. But I carried one certainty forward with me, a truth earned, not assumed. I had not survived because someone allowed me to. I had remained because I chose to. This house, this life, these decisions, they were never about age. They were about ownership. And ownership, once claimed, does not ask permission to exist. I closed the window as evening settled in, the room filling with quiet shadows and familiar peace. Tomorrow would come, as it always had, and I would meet it on my own terms.